According to historians, in the post-war USSR, more than 200,000 former collaborators were identified, hiding under false names. More than 8,000 of them were sentenced to capital punishment, but how many were never found? How many lived a life under a false biography, with someone else's awards on their chest? This story began on a sunny May day in 1975 on Red Square in Moscow. May 9th, 1975, the 30th anniversary of the Great Victory. Moscow met this day with special solemnity. The round date demanded a large-scale celebration. From early morning, the city filled with streams of people flowing toward the center. Red Square was decorated with scarlet banners, fluttering in the spring wind. Portraits of war heroes looked down from building facades. A brass band played victory marches. The sun illuminated the ancient Kremlin walls. Glare played on the domes of St. Basil's Cathedral. A sense of triumph hung in the air, mixed with a light sadness for those who did not live to see this day. In the formation of invited veterans lined up along the tribune stood Ivan Petrovich Gromov. 65 years old, a former Red Army soldier participant in the defense of Kiev partisan and holder of the Order of the Patriotic War of the Second Degree. He was invited as a representative of the veteran organization of the Krasnopresnensky district. He had arrived from his two-room apartment on the outskirts of Moscow while it was still dark. He put on the only suit he kept for special occasions and pinned his modest awards to his lapel. Tall, lean, with grey hair and deep wrinkles cutting through his face like war trenches. His jacket was buttoned up to the top. Despite the May warmth, the awards on his chest gleamed modestly. Ivan Petrovich stood in the honor guard, listened to speeches, applauded, and remembered comrades who did not live to see this day. His eyes, tired but clear, looked at the tribune where high-ranking military officials were reviewing the parade. And suddenly, his gaze stopped on one figure, a major general. His tunic was impeccably ironed, gold shoulder straps, an iconostasis of awards on his chest, the Order of the Red Banner, the Order of the Patriotic War of the First Degree, the Medal for Courage, the Medal for the Defense of Moscow, and about 10 others. The general's face was large, strong-willed, slightly plump from a good life, with receding hair on his forehead, but the features were recognizable, a mole on the chin on the left. When the general smiled, saying something to a neighbor, Ivan saw it. The front tooth on the right is gold. Ivan Petrovich's heart stopped for a second. The world around him froze. The music, speeches, applause, everything vanished. Only that face remained, a face he hadn't seen for 34 years, a face that had haunted his nightmares hundreds of times. The face of a man who sentenced hundreds of Soviet soldiers to death in the autumn of 1941. He felt nauseous. His legs gave way. He grabbed the shoulder of a neighbor veteran to keep from falling. "What is wrong with you, Ivan Petrovich?" the man asked sympathetically. "Do you feel unwell?" Gromov silently shook his head, unable to utter a word. His gaze was riveted to the general on the tribune. As if sensing the unwanted attention, the general turned around. His gaze met Ivan's for a moment. 1 second, 2. The general turned away and continued the conversation with his colleague, but Ivan saw a shadow slip across the general's face, barely noticeable, but eloquent. Did he recognize him? Or did it just seem so? Memory transported Ivan back 34 years, as if opening a door to the past that he had so diligently kept locked all these years. September, 1941. Encirclement near Kiev. Those terrible days when the Red Army retreated under the onslaught of German tank wedges, when communication between units was lost, when every day could be the last. The Germans advanced rapidly. Their motorized infantry penetrated the rear of Soviet positions, encircled entire divisions, and took prisoners by the tens of thousands. Ivan Petrovich was then a 25-year-old Red Army soldier, a machine gunner of the 37th Army. His unit fell into a cauldron south of Kiev in the Yagotina area. For 3 days they tried to break out of the encirclement. 3 days without sleep, without food, with the last cartridges. Explosions thundered all around. German planes strafed the forest where what remained of his company was hiding. The commander was killed by shrapnel, the political instructor wounded in the leg. Sergeant Major Petrov took command. The cartridges ran out on the third day. There were more than 10 wounded. There was nothing and no one to carry them. The sergeant major gathered those who could still stand. About 20 people out of 100. He spoke briefly. "We scatter in small groups, break through to our own in the east. Whoever can, breaks through." It wasn't an order. It was the last thing he could do for his fighters. Give them a chance. Ivan and 10 comrades went through the forests to the east, along the bed of a small river. They walked at night, hid in thickets during the day. Hungry, tired, unarmed. They threw away their submachine guns. There were no cartridges anyway, just extra weight. Ivan only had his Red Army book documents, a photograph of his mother, and a pectoral cross she had given him before he left for the front. They walked about 20 kilometers in 2 nights, thinking they had broken through. But on the 4th day, when they were crossing an open field, a raid overtook them. First, they heard the barking of dogs, then shouts in German, then bursts of automatic fire over their heads. There was nowhere to run. The field was open, the forest far away. They raised their hands. German motorized infantry on trucks came out from behind a hill. Submachine gunners jumped out and surrounded the group. 10 people were taken prisoner in a minute, lined up in a column, and driven along the road to the village, where trucks with prisoners were already standing. There, Ivan was hit with a rifle butt for the first time. A German lance corporal, young, about 20 years old, hit him just for intimidation. So they would know their place. Ivan fell, got up, and walked on, wiping blood from his split lip. The column of prisoners stretched for several kilometers. Hundreds, thousands of exhausted soldiers in torn uniforms, bloody, emaciated, trudged under German escort. Ivan walked in the middle of the column. To his right was Comrade Seryoja Kostin, a lad of 19 years. To his left, Sergeant Major Vasily, 40 years old. The escorts were German soldiers, submachine gunners, but Ivan noticed something strange. Among the convoy were people not in German uniforms, but in civilian clothes with armbands on their sleeves. Policemen, local collaborators, Ukrainians who went to serve the occupiers. They were harsher than the Germans, shouted in Russian, swore, beat stragglers with rifle butts and spat in faces. One of the policemen stood out especially from the rest. It was him Ivan remembered for the rest of his life. Young, about 25 to 27 years old, of strong build, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and a short haircut. He was dressed not in a uniform, but in a quality leather jacket, clearly taken from one of the killed Red Army soldiers or commissars. On his feet were sturdy German boots. On his chest hung a German MP-40 submachine gun. On his belt, a holster with a pistol. On the left sleeve of his jacket was a white armband with black letters, POLICEMAN. His face was coarse, with large features, with small eyes sitting deep under heavy brow ridges. On the chin on the left was a large dark mole, the size of a pea, noticeable from afar. But the main thing that Ivan remembered forever was when this policeman smirked or spoke. His front tooth on the right was visible, covered with a gold crown. At that moment, in the autumn of 41, gold teeth were a rarity. Only wealthy people, or those with connections to doctors, had them installed. This gold tooth glistened in the sun when the policeman smiled, and this smile was more terrible than any snarl. He didn't just escort the prisoners, he seemed to enjoy every minute of his power over them, walking along the column with the sweeping gait of a master, stopping, examining faces, choosing those who seemed interesting to him, speaking Russian, but with a noticeable Ukrainian accent. Ukrainian words slipped into his speech, betraying that he was local, that he had betrayed his own. He swore rudely, laughed loudly when he hit someone with a rifle butt. The German escorts looked at him with a mixture of disdain and approval. He did the dirty work. They could keep their hands relatively clean. Ivan saw this policeman stop a young lad who was barely walking, his leg shot through. The policeman smirked, said in Russian with a Ukrainian accent, "What, communist? Do your legs hurt? It's okay, I'll treat you now." He grabbed the lad by the scruff of the neck, dragged him into the ditch. A scream, a shot, silence. The policeman returned, wiped his hands on his pants, lit a cigarette, and continued walking beside the column. An hour later, he approached the group where Ivan was walking, stopped Sergeant Major Vasily. "Are you a communist?" he asked. Vasily remained silent. I'm asking, a communist? Vasily straightened up, looked the policeman in the eye. A communist and a Soviet officer, and you are a traitor and a bastard. The policeman's face didn't even change. He simply raised his submachine gun and fired a short burst at point-blank range. Vasily fell. The policeman stepped on his head with his boot, said, "That's how Soviets you will learn." He spat and walked on. Ivan remembered this face, every feature, the mole, the gold tooth, the square jaw, the cold eyes. He remembered the voice, low, with a Ukrainian accent, with a mocking tone. That night, when the column of prisoners was driven into a field for the night, Ivan and 3 comrades escaped, taking advantage of the darkness, crawling under the wire and leaving into the forest. 2 died from bullets, but Ivan and 1 other fighter escaped. A week later, they reached the partisans, fought until the end of the war in a partisan detachment, then returned to the army, reached Berlin. After the war, Ivan returned to Moscow, worked at a factory, got married, raised children, lived quietly and did not like to remember the war. But that day near Kiev, that policeman with the gold tooth often appeared in his dreams. Ivan would wake up in a cold sweat, seeing before his eyes how he shot Sergeant Major Vasily, how he trampled his head with his boot. He told himself, "Someday I will find that bastard." But time passed, the trail went cold, life took its toll. And so, on May 9th, 1975, 34 years later, Ivan Petrovich Gromov stands on Red Square and sees that policeman. Now he is a major general of the Soviet army, in orders, a hero. Ivan returned home that evening as if in a fog. His wife asked what happened, but he couldn't speak. He just sat by the window, staring into nowhere, smoking cigarette after cigarette. He thought, could he be mistaken? 34 years had passed, people change, age, but the mole is in the same place. The gold tooth is in the same place. The figure, the manner of holding himself, even the look, that same cold, unfeeling look of a murderer. The next day, Ivan Petrovich went to the military prosecutor's office. The secretary escorted him to the office of Major Sokolov, a young investigator of about 35. Ivan sat opposite, his hands trembling, and began to tell his story, slowly, confusedly, with pauses. The major listened, wrote it down. When Ivan finished, the major leaned back in his chair, looked at the veteran for a long time, thoughtfully. "Ivan Petrovich, do you understand who you are pointing to?" he asked cautiously. "This is Major General Mikhail Grigoryevich Kovalenko, hero of the Soviet Union, Knight of the Order of Lenin, a participant in the war from the first day. He has an impeccable biography, 30 years of irreproachable service. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "I'm absolutely sure, Comrade Major," Ivan answered firmly. "Such faces are not forgotten." "I saw him kill our soldiers. I saw how he mocked, how he enjoyed it. It is him, I swear on my life." Major Sokolov turned out to be a principled man, one of those rare people for whom truth is more important than career and peace of mind. Young, 35 years old, from a military family. He himself went through the war as a boy. In 45 he was 15. He served as a messenger at the division headquarters. He saw enough to understand the price of betrayal. After the war, he studied to be a lawyer, went to work in the military prosecutor's office because he wanted justice to triumph. He could have closed the case, said it was the mistake of an old man whose memory failed him after so many years. Written a resolution, due to the statute of limitations and lack of evidence, case closed. It would have been safe for him, convenient, would not have created problems. A major general is no joke. This is a person with huge connections, with friends in high offices. Then one wrong move, and the young major could be crushed, transferred somewhere to Chukotka as an investigator of the military prosecutor's office at a garrison of 50 people, or fired altogether for exceeding authority. But something in Ivan Petrovich's eyes, in his unshakable confidence, in the trembling of his hands when he spoke about how the policeman shot Sergeant Major Vasily, forced the major to act. Sokolov had seen many liars over the years of service, seen those who settled scores through denunciations, seen those who confused people due to old age. But Gromov was not one of them. In his words was the truth, suffered through heavy as a stone. The major made a decision. "I will check. Quietly, carefully, but I will check." He started with General Kovalenko's personal file, asked the Ministry of Defense archive for a copy of the full file, including all documents from the moment of conscription. The file was brought 3 days later. A thick folder stamped "for official use only." The major sat in his office until late at night, studying every page, taking notes, comparing dates. The biography really looked impeccable at first glance. Mikhail Grigorievich Kovalenko was born on March 3, 1916, in Kharkov into the family of a factory worker. Father died in the Civil War. Mother died of typhus in the year 22. He was raised in an orphanage. In 33, he graduated from the factory apprenticeship school, worked as a turner at the Kharkov tractor plant. In 39, he got married. In 41, drafted into the army. Fought near Moscow as part of the 32nd Rifle Division. In December 41, wounded by shrapnel in the shoulder, evacuated to a hospital in Kuibyshev. After recovery in March 42, sent to a reserve regiment. Then in July, transferred to reconnaissance. Fought as part of the reconnaissance company of the 15th Army on the Kalinin front. Awarded the Medal for Courage in September 42, the Order of the Red Banner in March 43 for a successful operation to capture an informant. In April 43, he joined the party. From there, the service continues uninterrupted. The Kursk Bulge, liberation of Ukraine, Poland, Germany, Berlin. After the war, the Frunze Military Academy, then service in headquarters. A slow but sure rise up the career ladder. In 56 a major, in 62 a lieutenant colonel, in 69 a colonel, in 73 a major general. Everything is clean, everything is logical, everything is in its place. Excellent characteristics. Disciplined, proactive, demanding of himself and subordinates, politically literate, devoted to the party's cause. But Major Sokolov was a meticulous man. He was used to checking not only what was written, but also what was between the lines, what was in the pauses, what was in the omissions. First, what alerted him in Kovalenko's documents. Until 1943, there are almost no details. Drafted in 1941, wounded in 1942, ended up in the hospital, then was sent to reconnaissance. But where exactly did he fight? In which unit? Who commanded? The major requested archives of the Military Enlistment Office and lists of units. It turned out that the archives had no exact information about Kovalenko's service from 1941 to 1943. Documents were lost. This happened in the war. Chaos, retreat, archives burned. But it was too convenient a coincidence. Second, the major found old draft documents from 1941. There is a record of Mikhail Kovalenko from Kharkov, drafted in August 1941. But there is no record that he was wounded or admitted to a hospital. The trail goes cold. The man seemed to disappear, and then in 1943 appeared again. Already with awards, with documents from reconnaissance, with recommendations for joining the party. Major Sokolov requested information from the KGB, asked to check if there were any policemen in the Kiev area in the autumn of 1941 fitting Ivan Petrovich's description. The KGB replied a week later. Yes, there was. The list of collaborators in the Kiev region included the name Mikhail Kovalenko, born in 1916, a resident of a village near Kiev, a policeman. Served the Germans from September 1941 to the spring of 1943. Listed as missing since 1943. This was already serious. Major Sokolov reported to his superiors. The case was transferred to the KGB. An in-depth check began. Witnesses were found. In the village near Kiev where policeman Kovalenko served, old people still lived who remembered him. 3 people were interrogated. All 3 confirmed. Yes, there was such a policeman, Mikhail, cruel, shot prisoners, mocked locals. One old man said, "He had a gold tooth in front. I remember how it glinted when he laughed at people." The KGB summoned General Kovalenko for interrogation at the end of August 1975. The official wording was vague, to clarify biographical data in connection with the preparation of Jubilee Award materials. Kovalenko received the summons in his office at the Ministry of Defense, read it, his face did not flinch. He had been a general for 30 years. He was used to controlling himself. But when he was left alone, he closed the office door, sat in a chair, and sat motionless for 10 minutes, staring at one point. He understood. It had begun. On the appointed day, September 9th, exactly at 10 in the morning, Major General Kovalenko entered the KGB building on Lubyanka. He was in full-dress uniform, with all awards, shaved, fit, back straight, gait confident. The secretary escorted him to the office of KGB Colonel Kravchenko, a large office on the 4th floor with a portrait of Dzerzhinsky on the wall, with a massive oak desk behind which sat the owner of the office. Colonel Kravchenko, 50 years old, grey-haired with cold grey eyes. One of those who knows how to read people like an open book. He stood up, shook the general's hand, offered him a seat. The conversation began politely, almost friendly. Kravchenko asked questions about service, about awards, about plans. Kovalenko answered calmly, confidently, but gradually the questions became more specific, sharper. Where exactly did you fight in 41, Comrade General? In which division? Who commanded the regiment? How did you get wounded? Under what circumstances did you end up in the hospital? Kovalenko answered, but the answers were general, without details. Division such and such, wounded near Moscow in December, hospital in Kuibyshev. He named commanders, but when Kravchenko asked him to describe the regimental commander, Kovalenko hesitated. It was a long time ago, I don't remember his face. We fought in chaos. Kravchenko nodded, made a note in his notebook, then asked casually, And were you by any chance in the Kiev area in the autumn of 41? Kovalenko froze for a second. Barely noticeable, but Kravchenko caught it. The general shook his head. No, I fought near Moscow. Kravchenko nodded, opened a folder, took out a sheet of paper, placed it before the general. This is a list of police collaborators in the Kiev region, compiled in 46, Kravchenko said, in a steady voice. Among them is Mikhail Kovalenko, born in 1916, a resident of a village near Kiev, a policeman. Served the Germans from September 41 to the spring of 43, missing since the spring of 43. Is this you? This is a namesake, Comrade Colonel. The surname Kovalenko is common in Ukraine. I fought for the motherland from the first day of the war, received 23 wounds and contusions, awarded orders and medals. Do not dare to disgrace me with these accusations. I am a general of the Soviet army. Kravchenko showed witness testimonies from the village. Kovalenko tensed but continued to deny. Then Kravchenko called Ivan Petrovich Gromov into the office. The door opened. An old veteran entered, thin, grey-haired, with awards on his chest. He looked at the general. The general looked at him. A second of silence. It is him, Ivan Petrovich said quietly but firmly. This is that policeman who shot our soldiers in September 1941 near Kiev. I recognize him. The mole on the chin. The gold tooth. The voice. It is him. Kovalenko was silent. His face was pale. Sweat appeared on his forehead. He looked at Ivan, and in his eyes was hatred, fear, the realization of the end. The investigator presented one more document. The exhumation. The real Mikhail Kovalenko, drafted in 1941, was buried near Kiev in a mass grave. His remains were exhumed. An examination was carried out. Blood Group 2. General Kovalenko has Blood Group 1. They are different people. Everything collapsed. Major General Mikhail Grigorievich Kovalenko wilted. He denied no more. He confessed. Yes, he was a policeman. Yes, he served the Germans. Yes, he escorted prisoners, shot stragglers. In the spring of 1943, when the Germans began to retreat, he realized that he would be hanged as a traitor. He found the body of a wounded Red Army soldier named Mikhail Kovalenko in a field. He was still alive, but dying. The policeman did not help him, just waited until he died, took his documents, awards, personal belongings. Then he deserted from the Germans, crossed the front line, surrendered to Soviet troops as the escaped Red Army soldier Kovalenko. He was checked, but superficially. The documents were real. The awards were there. He told a plausible story. He was sent to a hospital, then to a reserve regiment, then to reconnaissance. He fought until the end of the war, really bravely, earned new awards. After the war, he entered the academy, made a career. 30 years he lived under someone else's name, with someone else's biography, with someone else's awards. The trial took place in October 1976, closed, without the press. In the hall sat military men, KGB representatives, witnesses. Ivan Petrovich Gromov gave testimony. He told how he saw this man kill Soviet soldiers, how he mocked, how he rejoiced, spoke calmly, without emotion, just facts. But his hands trembled. The defendant sat in a cage in civilian clothes, shoulder straps torn off, awards confiscated, rank stripped. He is no longer Major General Kovalenko. He is Policeman Mikhail, a traitor, a murderer. He did not look into the hall, lowered his head, remained silent. His lawyer asked to take into account combat merits after 1943, but the prosecutor was adamant. No merits can redeem betrayal and the murder of one's own. Sentence: deprivation of all ranks, awards, rights. 15 years of strict regime corrective labor camps. They took into account his age, 60 years, so not execution. But 15 years at his age is practically a life sentence. He was taken by prisoner transport to the north. He died in the camp 3 years later. In 1979, from a heart attack, he was 63 years old. Ivan Petrovich Gromov lived another 20 years. He died in 1995 at the age of 85 in his apartment, surrounded by grandchildren. Before his death, he told his son, "I did what I had to. Vasily can sleep peacefully. I avenged him, avenged all of ours who were shot then." This story became known only in the 2000s, when the KGB archives were partially declassified. The documents of the traitor general's case were transferred to a museum. Ivan Petrovich Gromov's photograph is kept there as well. An old man in a jacket with medals looks into the camera calmly, with dignity. On the back of the photo is an inscription: "Veteran of the Great Patriotic War who exposed the traitor general. Memory did not fail." This story is about how one man, a simple veteran, was able to stand up against a system that did not want to believe in the guilt of a general. How memory can be stronger than time, how justice can wait 34 years, but still overtake the guilty. And about the fact that no orders, no shoulder straps, no high rank will wash away the blood spilled in 1941 on the road near Kiev. Ivan Petrovich Gromov could have remained silent, could have thought, "An old story, 34 years past, who will believe it? He is a general, a hero." He could have been afraid that he himself would be accused of slander in an attempt to blacken a distinguished person. But he did not remain silent, because before his eyes stood Sergeant Major Vasily, who was shot before his eyes, because in his ears rang the cries of hundreds of soldiers who were driven into captivity and killed like cattle. Because the memory of the fallen gives no right to remain silent. Major General Kovalenko wore someone else's name, someone else's awards, someone else's glory for 30 years. He built a career on the blood of a killed Red Army soldier. He taught young officers military honor while he himself was a traitor. He stood on the tribune next to real heroes while he himself shot them 34 years ago. But memory is stronger than lies. One veteran remembered his face, and that was enough. When Ivan Petrovich was asked how he could remember a face so clearly after so many years, he answered, "Just when you see your comrades being killed before your eyes, it is not forgotten. Such faces are cut into memory forever. I saw him in my sleep every night for 34 years, how he laughs, how he shoots, how he tramples Vasily's head with his boot. Of course, I recognized him." This story reminds us, the war does not end on Victory Day. It continues in the memory of those who survived. It continues in the search for justice for those who died. Sometimes justice overtakes the guilty decades later, when they already thought they were saved, that their new identity was reliable, that the past would not catch up. But the memory of the victims does not die. It lives in those who remember. May 9th, 1975 began as a holiday for Major General Kovalenko. He stood on the tribune, reviewed the parade, smiled, was confident in himself. It ended with arrest, trial, camp, death in obscurity. And his end began with one look, the look of an old veteran who simply remembered.